This is my favorite Cinematic FPV drone, and I'm going to show you step by step exactly how to build this. These are all the parts we're going to be using in this build. I'm going to show you each of them quick before we get started in the actual build. First piece, this is the flight controller and ESC. It is the Foxier Reaper AIO. That's what that looks like. Basically, it's your flight controller and ESC all in one. Next part of the build, I'm going to set this aside. It's going to be the motors. We went with the Luminaire Zip 1404 4600 kV motors on this build, and I will show you what the actual motor looks like really quick. Here is this little tiny motor. This squad we're going to be using a TBS Crossfire receiver. Depending what receiver protocol you use, this part may vary, but I fly Crossfire Vista with a Nebula Pro camera. Only the Nebula Pro camera will fit in this frame. The full-size normal DJI camera won't fit, so we are going to be running the Nebula Pro camera. We have some 3D printed parts that I have here to mount the antennas. Propellers, I like the 6-blade HQ props there. And for the frame, this is the Quav Pro 2.5 inch. So you got your bottom plate, top plate. This is one of the camera plates. This little piece is for the upper top mount here. Have a 3D printed GoPro mount, and then you get a bag of hardware. But to get started on this drone, I'm going to fly it as a pusher. So pusher configuration, the motors are going to be facing downward through the frame, and that's why it's called pusher. On this squad, we're going to mount the motors to the top plate. So you're going to flip the top plate over, and the motors may be facing upward like that. So I'm going to put the bottom plate on the side for now, and then we're going to start mounting motors to this plate. So we just opened up the bag that came with the motors. These are the motor screws I'm going to be using. They are like the perfect length for this frame. You just want to make sure the screws don't hit any of the windings on the bottom of the motor so they don't go too deep through the frame, but these screws are going to work. You're going to use a 1.5 millimeter driver to install these. So we're going to thread these in through the top plate. I'm going to have the wires for the motor going down the center of the frame like that, down this little piece. That way we can put a zip tie there and keep it all nice and tidy. None of these have to be super tight. You don't want to strip anything out. But I like to tighten everything kind of in a crisscross pattern here, just to make sure everything is tight. And that motor is mounted now, so I will do the same thing for the other 3 motors now. And you want the wires coming down these arms towards the center of the frame like that. Next, we're going to move over to the AIO. That's what's going to get mounted next. First, we're going to want to tin all these motor pads. We're going to start soldering. Basically, I'm going to tin everything I'm going to use before bolting it down into the quad. I'm going to tin the positive and negative here, as well as all of the motor outputs. On this one, the wires are kind of meant to kind of stick to the sides here in these spots, so I'm going to make sure I tin all of that. Tin all these motor pads here on all 4 corners. So I got the little grommets installed through the flight controller. You want to stick these through the holes. It's not too difficult to squish them and kind of work them through. The number 1 tip I can give with soldering is to make sure you always have a clean tip. Another thing you can do, if you have a flux pen, you can put some flux on it. It'll definitely help. So just put some flux on there. I'm going to tin these pads right here. So I'm going to apply some heat to it, just like this. And then start touching the solder to basically between the tip and the pad itself. And you can kind of just work the solder in that way. You don't want to overheat the board either. So it's kind of, it just takes practice really. Like I said, I would recommend getting one of those test solder kits if you've never soldered anything like this before, especially on this small of a workspace. These are some very tiny pads that we're working with. So you just want to make sure you got get flown over the hole. It'll flow just like that. It'll be a nice, smooth, shiny spot just like that. And those two are tinned now. I'm going to clean off my tip quick here. I'm going to put some flux on each of the motor outputs here. Same thing, you're wanting to put heat into the pad first, then feed your solder in. Just like that. And you want the same thing, you want it to flow across the whole pad. And again, you don't want to overheat the pads. You can damage them or pull them off with too much heat. There's a lot of sensitive components on the board. So you just want to make sure you're getting a nice flow there, and you don't want to overheat the pads. We'll just add a little bit more on each of these. Reflow them. Those are looking good. And we're going to continue working our way around on all these motor pads, just like this. So get some heat, get the solder in there, let it flow, get some heat, let it flow, just like that. And you want to just keep working your way all the way around, just like that. All right, we have the positive and the negative tinned, as well as all of the motor outputs all the way around. So at this point, I'm going to put the other two screws through the stack there. When I say stack, I mean the AIO. The reason why I wait to put all of the hardware in this is just so I have a little extra room when tinning. These are just plastic little nuts here, so I don't want to melt them or anything like that. I generally will just hold it with my finger and thread the screw in with the wrench here, so you can easily hold it in place with your finger. So that's it. The AIO is completely mounted in there. All the pads are tinned. Next, we're going to work on getting the motor wires soldered to the AIO. I'm only going to pull one set of wires out at a time. That way you don't have all other wires in your way. I like pretty clean builds, so I try not to leave too much slack, but at the same time, if I ever need to take this back apart, or if I need to do any type of repairs, or if one of these wires breaks off or anything like that, I want to have enough slack in the wire to be able to trim a tiny bit off if I have to in the future without adding wire. Since I said we're going to be following this contour of the frame here, basically just going to kind of pinch the wires with my finger, keep it on the frame like that, and then move them over to the pads where they're going to be, just like that. And I will go ahead and trim all of those down just like that. Then put those wires on the side. Now we have enough wire here. It doesn't matter the order you connect these wires to the board, because you are going to change the motor directions later, but just to keep it clean, I like doing the furthest most left to the furthest most left, center to the center, and right to the right, just to keep the wires as flat to the frame as possible. Like I said, it doesn't make a difference which way you do it, but I just like to keep it as clean as I can. We're going to go left to right. So I'm going to move these other two out of the way for a second. I'm going to tin these wires now. Pre-tinning everything makes it all go together so much smoother in the end. So we're going to strip a little bit of the wire when doing this. I try to move the wire out because you don't want to solder over your flight controller. So I try to move them over to the side. I also don't like soldering over the motors, because if a drip of solder goes in there, you're going to short your motor, which you also don't want to do. You're going to heat the wire and push solder into the wire just like that. And I'm going to do that for each consecutive wire here. And again, I don't like doing it over the flight controller just in case you were to drop a piece here. So I'm going to just tin all these, and then I will show you the next steps. I might trim a little bit off these just because some of them are a little long, which as long as they're going to connect still at the end, that is perfectly fine. Since you tin the motor pad and you tin the wire, basically you're going to move the wire over, apply a small amount of heat, and the entire pad will reflow with the motor wire. That way you have one nice flow here. So I'm just going to do that quick. See if we can get a good shot of this. See, basically you touch the heat there. And you don't want to get too hot again, like I had said before. Just enough to let it all flow together. Once it's all flown together, then that one's done. You can move on to the next one. And now to the next one. It's all flown together. And you move on to the last one on this motor. And some of these, when you have to mount them to the sides of the board, it's a little bit more difficult. I wouldn't recommend this build for like a very beginner, unless you are very comfortable with this type of soldering. How it's all shiny, all the wires flowed together nicely there. I'm gonna go ahead and do the other three. That way those will all be done, and then we can put some zip ties on these wires here, just like that, to keep them all together. And then we will continue on. Now you have all 4 of the motors attached there. And if you look, they're all kind of nicely flown. All the joints are nice and shiny. They all flowed together nicely. The wiring will all sit where it needs to sit, so we don't have to worry about that. I'm just going through, cleaning up a little bit now. Again, not too tight, enough that it's not really going to wiggle around and slip down the frame. And then you just trim the tail off. Nicely all flowed together. See how all the joints are nice and shiny? It is all flowed nicely. There shouldn't be any issues here. Next, we're going to work on attaching our XT30 cable. So I'm going to trim some off this before we even really see here what's going on. So on this quad here, you have your positive here and your negative on this side. So they're going to connect like that. But first, we're going to kind of see where they would lay. That is just going to be way too much cable. I kind of want it to sit kind of like that in there. So I'm going to trim a bit off this. I'm going to start with cutting that much off. That's looking a bit better. I'm still going to lose a little bit because I'm going to zip tie the cable down like that. So I'm going to trim both of these down a little bit more. And then I'm going to take a little extra off the positive just because of the angle it's going to be at. So I am going to have it look something like that, how the positive is just a little bit shorter, just because of the angle here that we're going to have to attach it, just like that. First I need to tin these wires, because this is already tinned, so I just take a little blue tack. I'm going to stick them kind of in here like this. I'll hold it down just like that, so that way you can get your tin work done without really having to mess with it too much. You can use helping hands or kind of whatever you want, but I generally will just use blue tack because it's generally kind of easier depending on what you're trying to do. So keep the wire and then feed the solder into the wire. And same thing on this one, I'll probably need a bigger piece, but heat up the wire. kind of push it into the side of it a little bit, and then you can actually melt it right into the wire there. And then that is tinned. Move that on the side. So we have a tinned wire here. And now I'm going to apply it onto the quad. So on these, I like to, since it's a bigger pad, I like to heat up the pad again first, reflow it. It seems like the more recent that it's been reflown, the easier that it'll have to be reflown again. So basically, gonna heat that up, kind of push the wire into it, let it all reflow, and then there's a little bridge there. So I'm glad this happened. If you ever have an issue where you bridge a pad like that, you can basically just scoop it right away, just like that. So same thing, heat up the wire and the pad and let it flow all together as one. Our XT30 cable is soldered on there. So next step, we're gonna mount the capacitor. I like mounting this one since I'm using kind of a remote capacitor, I guess you could call it. I like sticking it near the back of the frame like this. You just want to make sure you still have access to this USB port. So I'm going to zip tie it down. Next, we're going to strip and tin these wires. These wires, you want to keep them as short as distance as possible, short as length of wire, I guess I should say, to the positive and negative lead here, because I'm going to solder right on top of the wires that we just stuck down. So I'm going to trim it about there, then strip the wire, just like that. Now, some of these I like doing one at a time. Sometimes you can just do both wires at once and make the process all together. Again, don't solder over your flight controller. So, going to move the wire like that. Same thing, apply heat to the wire and then feed into the wire like that. And then that one's tinned. Now next, we're going to apply that to the positive pad right there. Doing these compound joints can be kind of difficult, especially in such a small space like this. Just take your time, go slow, keep it clean, and try and keep everything in one place. So I'm going to heat this and try and hold the bottom wire too and let it flow all together as one. So again, I'm going to tin the wire away from the flight controller. AIO in this case. Just heat it up, feed it into the wire, move it away, clean your tip again, and then you are good to start applying it to the negative pad here. So we're gonna stick this down just like this and let it flow all together just like we did on the positive. Both of those connections are on there good. It's right on top of the XT30 connections. And I just zip tied the capacitor in the back of the frame like that. You still have access to the USB port, just like that, and this can kind of wiggle out of the way a little bit. So you want to zip tie the cable down just like that. So in case you were to eject a battery and yank on it, it's going to put the pressure on that zip tie and not your joint here, so you don't want to lose a pad or anything or damage it. But this portion of the frame now is complete. We're going to move on to the bottom portion and work on that end. I am going to be using Crossfire, so I'm going to only need 4 of the connections here. These connections right here. So we have power, ground, RX, and TX. So first, I'm going to re-tin these pads. I had to use this in another quad originally, but I pulled it out of it for this build. So I'm going to re-tin these pads quickly. It doesn't take much. We're just going to reflow it basically. There's plenty of solder on here already, but if there wasn't, you would want to just add a tiny bit to it. Just like this. I kind of just reflow them. Those are good to go. Okay, so after looking at the wiring diagram, these three here, these wires I'm going to use for my receiver. That way I can have everything off one plug. These four here are going to go to the video transmitter, your Cadex Vista here. These are all kind of long. I'm going to trim them down a little bit, just to try to make it easier. You do want to leave enough length that you have enough room to plug it in, but you can always twist these together to shorten it some, but taking about that much off should be good to start. So I'm going to keep these separate. I'm going to move those over. These are the ones we're going to be working with for the Vista here. Okay, same thing as before. You want to pull a little bit of wiring off because we're going to tin these wires. Okay, so I pulled up the wiring diagram here. I always go to the manufacturer website to get the wiring diagrams just to make sure it's what the manufacturer says is generally the most accurate, hopefully. You have battery power, ground, RX, and TX. This is RX at the AIO, so this is going to go to the TX pad on the Vista. So I'm going to stick this right to the TX pad here. Next is going to be the TX to RX here. And again, just like the other ones, take your time, make sure it all flows together. These wires are super tiny, so hold them maybe an extra amount of time to make sure they stay in place. Next is going to be the ground here. Like I said, take your time with these. They can be kind of a little pain. Just make sure it's clean, make sure your tip's clean, and take your time, and it'll all work out. Okay, now you should have your Vista all wired up, just like that. So now we're good to mount this in the frame. Okay, now that your Vista wiring is complete, we're going to set this on the side, and I'm going to grab the bottom plate, and we're going to install the standoffs on this bottom plate, just so we can know the type of spacing we're working with, for what length hardware we're going to use for that. So you want all these standoffs right here. These are going to be all of your screws here for the standoffs. So cut open your bag there, get all your standoff screws out, set this back on the side, and basically you're just going to start threading standoffs onto hardware here. Then you'll go through and tighten them all down after. So there's one. Okay, you have all the standoffs in now, and these are going to be the hardware for the top plate, so I'm going to put that in its own little compartment there to grab those later. Now, I'm going to check these screws here that they had provided, because these seem like they are long enough to go through the whole frame and the Vista. So I'm going to check these now, see if they actually provided that, because that would be pretty cool. So there's that. Again, this is the front of the frame, or sorry, this is the front of the frame. So you want your camera facing that way. We're gonna check these screws right now. And those are gonna be the perfect length. So they actually give you all the hardware you need right here to install these parts right here. I didn't try the ones they provided for the frame, for the flight controller, but those look like they would have been sufficient as well. It's nice when frame companies give you all the hardware you need for your build. So the Vista is 20 by 20, so I'm using the 20 by 20 mounting holes on the bottom plate here. So this is like 20 by 20 mounting there. So I'm gonna mount all those. I do not tighten this one down because you need to be able to get to this antenna mount. That should all be good. Now we're just gonna do a quick little test fit here, and we're gonna make sure none of those screws are gonna touch. Basically, you wanna make sure that these bolts right here are not gonna touch your AIO. So you wanna check the spacing, make sure they're not gonna touch. Otherwise you're gonna short it out and or bad things are gonna happen. All right, so we have the Vista mounted in the frame here. It's all wired up. Now we're gonna work on the receiver next. For my build, I'm using a crossfire receiver. So this is the Immortal T antenna for the crossfire. I'm gonna set this on the side for now. And then we have a little cable set, which I actually don't need right now. I am gonna take the heat shrink out of it though. That's the crossfire receiver. Basically squares ground, then power, then there are yellow wires and they go on that third hole there. So we don't need any of this wiring. I basically opened it for this heat shrink. Okay, first things first, we're gonna do some tinning on this. So I'm going to tin ground pad, power, in here. We're gonna tin these three. And to do that, I am just gonna stick it on some blue tack. That way, it'll hold right there while I'm tinning this. Same thing as before, always make sure your solder tip is clean. And if you want, you can put a little bit of flux on here. These are so tiny that it doesn't really make a difference, I feel like. But it's always not a big deal to add some. So just like before, we're going to heat the pad and then feed the solder in, just like before. And it's tinned, just like that. So there's the next one. And the last one. Next, I'm going to figure out where I'm going to put it in the frame. So I am going to stick the receiver probably right here underneath the wiring there. So it doesn't need to be very long from there. I'm actually just going to strip them where they're at and then stick them on there and see kind of where we're at. So just to keep it easy, I'm going to stick this back in the blue tack and pull the wires over here. Helps to tin the wire. So we'll tin that ground wire. Sometimes I just do things one at a time, but I could really strip all these and tin them all and then just solder them all on at the same time. But sometimes I just like doing things one at a time. Take it slow. Make sure I'm getting everything right where I want it. These ones are so tiny that like you just barely tap it and it flows. Next is going to be the power. So this should be 5 volt. All right, next one. Okay, positive's on there. So that's your 5 volt. And now we're going to do the signal wire. Same thing. I'm just going to tin this. Again, this whole process here really is dependent on which receiver you're going to use. I just prefer for my builds to use crossfire at the moment. Just really depends on what technology comes out in the future. Okay, all of those look good. All of that looks pretty solid. So next I'm going to stick on the antenna here. It's just a UFL connector. So there's this little dot right there, that little circle. And you want to make sure the circle here. So this is going to be your bind button. So I always kind of have it routed kind of like this. That way I'm not covering that bind button in case I need to rebind it later. Right here, and cut this down to size. Right about there will be good. The rest of that over there. And we're going to put that right in here. Just like that. Now with the heat gun, I'm just going to shrink this tubing down while trying to keep the antenna to the side like that. and that's all heat shrink down now. So got the bind button accessible if I need it to be, and it's all shrink down, so it's all protected. Now what I like to do is basically twist this wire up. Kind of helps keep it all neat and secure, just like that. And I'll kind of twist this whole thing up some more just to keep that all twisted together as well. I'm gonna get a small piece of two-sided tape. I use this 3M VHB tape. It works very well. Basically bought a roll of this stuff when I started, and that's still what's left of the roll, so a little goes a long way. Just stick it at the bottom of the receiver just like that. Make sure it's on there good. Now I'm going to peel this up. So if I stick it over further, just like that, then it should be good, just like that. Okay, so I'm basically going to have the antenna come out just like that. Basically, I'm twisting these wires up to help shorten them and keep them all together at the same time. So next, we need to mount the camera in the camera cage. So this side kind of is shorter at the top. So this is going to be your bottom. This came with screws, but so did the camera. So I might use those ones if there's a little bit shorter ones. Yeah, I think this is going to be a better option. So the Nebula Pro camera came with its own hardware as well. A lot of these different things will come with its own hardware, dependent on what it is. I think these little tiny short ones are going to be my best bet right there to keep this thing in place. I'm just going to take this, put it on the end right here like that, and then I'm going to mount one of the camera cages just like that. And you don't want to get it tight in there, just get it loose for now. You can make some adjustments later, but just get it to the point where it's not going to fall off. Now we'll do the other side. And again, the full-size DJI camera won't fit in here with angle. So just be warned, you're going to want to run something other than the DJI camera. Basically, I'm just going to zip tie this cable together like that and to the frame, probably. Just that way I have enough slack to do what I need to do with the camera, but it's also going to be protected and not get bunched up anywhere or anything like that. Just keep it clean. Yeah, the Vista antenna is just a UFL connector. Like I said before, I use the original style Vista antennas. I don't like the box nail ones. I feel like the range isn't as good. So I run these antennas. And it's a UFL connector just like on the Crossfire, and click it right on. Then you're going to fold this little door, this little hold down over it, and then you push it underneath there. And that's what's going to hold your antenna on the Vista. That way it's not going to pop off. And you tighten the screw down in the corner again. And then now your Vista antenna is on there. Now you can finish securing these nuts down for the Vista. So now we're going to grab the front half again. Plug this back in. And again, when I'm plugging in, I'm holding the back side of the connector on the board. That way it doesn't put too much pressure on it. Make sure it's lined up straight. And make sure the right side is facing, because it only plugs in one direction. You can, if you force it, it'll plug in the other way, but it should only plug in one way. Now you're going to line up the camera cage. There we go. So I'm just gonna toss a couple screws in just to keep this all together. I would say at this point, you're good to put the rest of the hardware in the frame. So I would just start working my way around, threading some in. I like to start everything by hand and not with the driver, just so I'm not cross-threading anything or putting anything crooked. Okay, got all the top plate hardware on, so I'll tighten these ones up. Okay, we're gonna get this antenna in here, just like that. And we're gonna get it into the bottom section here. Some of these are split seam, some of them you have to put in before you bolt it to the Vista. I prefer ones where I can either cut it and it'll still be secure. So like in this case, I can bend it around it just like that, because it's gonna mount right there with a screw. And then I'm going to mount the crossfire above that. This is the 3D piece that was printed for the crossfire. So we're gonna take this, kind of get it all lined up. Just like that. Slide it through, just like that. And then this is gonna sit in the middle of that. And then I'm gonna bolt it down right there. That's gonna be good there. Now it'll all line up nice. It's pretty good all mounted in the back just like that. So we're getting there. Next, I'm gonna take the little camera protector off and we're gonna adjust the camera, kind of set camera angle. You don't really fly high camera angle on these types of quads. You keep it pretty mellow. So I'm gonna set it like right about here for now. And then I can make adjustments as needed down the road. This is supposed to be a smooth, slow flying quad, so try to keep it slow, smooth flying. Your camera angle influences your speed a lot. And be careful, don't screw these in too tight. It's just going into the plastic housing with two little brass inserts on each side of the camera. But that'll be a good camera angle to start. And we can always adjust it later by those two screws. Now we have the GoPro mount. You line up these holes here with the mount on here. So you're gonna slide it through like that. And then press these mounts through the holes in the top. Just like that. Now you're gonna slide this whole piece. This tail here is gonna slide into the hole right there. So you're gonna just stick it in there like that, and then slide it all together, just like that. And then we have a screw that came in the kit that will go in that spot. This one is a 2mm screw. So it'll thread right into the front there and secure all of that together. And next we're going to put the battery straps in. These are those battery straps I was telling you about at the beginning. It's really convenient because they're just elastic. You just pull on this tab. But basically you're going to pinch the end of this, just like that. Pinch it together, and you're gonna stick it through this hole on the frame, right there where my finger is. So you're gonna push it through that hole, which is gonna take a little bit to get through. Slide it through just like that. Fold it up over the top of this little lug here, just like that. And then pull it tight. And that will get it where it needs to be. So basically through the hole, then over the top. So the same thing on this side, and then when you're going to slide a battery in, you'll just lift up on this, and then stick your battery in here, and then let go. I'm gonna get this battery pad in here. So peel the tape off, kind of follow the contour. There's a bolt hole there for you, and there's a bolt hole in the back to line it all to get all up. Kind of put some pressure on it, and it should look just like that on there. Now we're going to put the second battery strap on, and that is the overall assembly there of the frame. So next, I'm just going through it now, making sure everything is how it should be, and everything looks to be where it needs to be in the frame. No wires in the way, no wires hanging off weird or anything like that. Just doing a quick once over to make sure that everything's correct. And now, next step, we're going to get a spoke stoppers, plug it in, plug a battery in, and make sure we get the tones from the ESCs. We're going to plug this in to test it and make sure everything is good. Okay, the moment of truth. Seems perfect. So, unplug that, unplug the smoke stopper. Now the next step is going to be, first we're going to do ESC configurator to configure the BlueJay firmware that's on these ESCs. Then we'll jump into Betaflight and we will go from there. But the first part of this build is complete. Leave your propellers off. You do not want your propellers on when you are doing anything in Betaflight or with configuring the ESCs. So make sure your propellers are still off. We will put those on later. But that's going to conclude this part of the build. Alright, the next step is going to be plugging it into the computer, and we're going to start with ESC configurator. That's how you configure the BlueJay software that's on these ESCs. For this AIO, you're going to need a micro USB cable and just plug it directly into your AIO. And next thing, since we're configuring the ESCs, we're going to need them powered up, so I'm going to plug in a battery. Okay, now on the computer here, you're going to have, in a Chrome browser, go to esc-configurator.com. Then you're going to click select serial port. You're going to click the one that shows for your flight controller there. Click connect. Then come over here on the right and click connect. Okay, now we're going to go to read settings on the bottom right. Okay, it pulled everything up right here. First thing we're going to do is come down where it says flash all ESCs. Okay, we're going to run the BlueJay firmware. Leave the ESC alone. Select version. We're going to click the newest version there. Select PWM frequency. See, I'm going to run 96. So if you just click flash, it's going to begin flashing each of the ESCs with the new firmware. Okay, now that the ESCs are flashed, we can continue on changing other settings. Temperature protection, all this here I'm going to leave alone. Favorite parts, we're going to open the Melody editor. I usually use the Mario Power Up tone. And you can click play to hear it. We're just going to accept, 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 and accept. Then click Write Melodies. Now close this. We're going to disconnect on ESC configurator. I'm going to unplug the battery. I'm going to leave the USB cable plugged in because now we're going to open up Betaflight. Okay, Betaflight is open. We're going to click connect. Okay, when this pops up, it's saying the accelerometer is not calibrated. So we're just going to click close for now. We're going to go under setup and we're going to calibrate that accelerometer. Okay, but first see how the quad is upside down here in Betaflight. We're going to go to configuration. Under here, under board and sensor alignment, you're going to click this. We want to do a 180 and a flip. So we're going to do clockwise, 180 and a flip. Save and reboot. Then we're going to go up to setup. Click calibrate accelerometer. Make sure your quad is on a flat level surface. Then once that's done, you should be able to move the quad and it'll make the same movements that you see on screen. So now that that's all set, we can continue on. So we're gonna go to ports. We used UART1 for our receiver, so serial RX there, and we did TX2 for the video. So we're gonna turn on configuration MSP here for UART2. We're gonna click save and reboot. Okay, now that these are all configured here, we should be able to go to configuration. This gyro is locked at 3.2 kilohertz, and we're just gonna leave those. We're gonna leave these three checked here. Craft name, I'm gonna leave blank. Camera angle, you leave that at 0. Arm angle, I personally change this to 180 degrees, just because then if the quad's on its side or anything, you're able to arm it. Under factory at 25, if you're past the 25-degree angle of the quad, like sitting on the ground, it won't let you arm it. It is kind of a safety thing. I just disarm it personally that way at 180. Then we keep going down here. It looks like on this one specifically, I'm going to put air mode on a switch. So I'm going to turn off permanently enable air mode. We don't have GPS on this drone, so we're going to leave that alone. Okay, on the top right here, we had already changed this here, so we're going to leave that alone. I don't change anything there. Beacon tone, I just leave all those. And we're going to turn both of these on. And then I'm going to leave all these just on. It's just under beeper configuration. So we're going to click save and reboot now that we're done with that tab. Next is power and battery. I generally don't change anything here. The first few, probably about 10 or so batteries on the quad, I'll check the voltage after. Just to make sure it correlates to what I'm seeing in the goggles. If your battery is plus or minus voltage from what you are seeing in the goggles when you unplug the battery, or while flying, you can change it here to try to calibrate that. Generally, I have no issues here, so I'm just gonna leave this all alone. The next section here would be fail-safe. We're gonna leave this alone because it'll be set to no pulses on your radio. So we're under receiver. This is where we're gonna bind the receiver and our transmitter. The receiver protocol I am using personally is under serial USB, so that is fine. And then under S-Bus, we're gonna go to Crossfire. And then I'm gonna save and reboot. Since I use Crossfire, my binding process is gonna be a bit different than what yours will be, depending on what you are using. I personally use Crossfire. If you want me to make a full video about Crossfire setup, leave a comment down below and make sure I can get to that in the near future. But at this point, you should be able to move your sticks, and they should move in the corresponding sections in Betaflight. So all that is set up there. Just gonna keep scrolling down here, make sure we have everything that we want to check there. Everything else looks good here, so let's click save. Now we're gonna go to the modes tab. This is where you're gonna set up your switches on your radio. So I'm gonna uncheck that. First we're gonna do arm. So when it says auto, as long as it's mapped right, when you flip your switch that you want to use, you'll see it move. So I want my armed switch in this position here. So I'm gonna kind of select it right there. Next, I'm gonna do flip over after crash. So I will scroll down. We're gonna add beeper, add range. I like my beeper being right here in the middle on this one. And then for flip over after crash, turtle mode, we're gonna do that same switch that I did, and I'm gonna have it in the bottom position. So it's a three-way toggle. So forward is nothing, center will be beeper, bottom will be flip over after crash. Next, we're gonna do air mode, and we're gonna do add range, and it'll be when this switch is forward. So anything other than this position, air mode will be off. We're gonna save that, so it saves all your settings. Okay, next we're going to go down to the motors tab. Okay, on the motors tab, so we're using BlueJay software on our ESCs. We can use bidirectional D-Shot. Click agree. We're gonna click save and reboot. Up at the top here where it says motor direction, I'm gonna run props out just because I don't like if I am flying close to some dirt or anything, it won't get blown into my lens. So I always run props out on these types of drones. And we can click save and reboot again. So next, this is the reason why I told you not to install your propellers on the drone. We're gonna make sure the motors are going in the right direction. We're gonna set that now. So we're gonna plug in the battery. So we're going to click reorder motors just to check to make sure all the motors are in their correct positions. You're going to click I understand the risks and the propellers are removed. Again, I can't stress this enough. Make sure your propellers are off. Click that and then click start. So basically, you're going to look and see which one is spinning, which it's this back left. Normally it is 1, 2, 3, 4. So you just click the one that is spinning, so it's going to remap it for you. Just click the one that's spinning. Then look for the next one. It is the front left. Click that. Next, it is the rear right. So click that one. Then the last one is going to be the front right. So you click that one. And then you just click save. Now it just changed the motor order for you. Next, we're going to do motor direction. So same thing. Understand the risks and make sure your propellers are removed. Your propeller should still not be on. Click that. Then you're going to click the wizard. We're going to spin all motors. Basically, I just feel which direction they're going. That one's right. This one needs to be switched. So this is 1. We're going to click on 1. Now it should reverse the rotation of the motor. So here, this one is going this way, so 4 needs to be reversed. We'll click 4. Now it should be spinning the proper direction. And this one, it is spinning the correct direction. So these two spin outward, these two spin inward. So now click stop motors, close. Now your motors have been remapped and the directions have already been changed. Okay, now that you save that, you can unplug your battery again. Okay, next is going to be the presets tab. In this tab, you'll find a bunch of different types of presets. This is new for Betaflight 4.3. We're going to scroll down. We're going to do the UAV text Cinewhoop. Click that. Under options, we're going to check all the options we have. We do have RPM filtering, and we have the 96K PWM frequency. So click pick. Click agree. Okay, next we're going to do 150 Hertz under the keywords here. So under 150 Hertz here, we're going to do TBS Crossfire. It'll have another drop down. There's a few different smoothings you can do. There's Racing, Freestyle, HD Freestyle, Cinematic, and Ultra Smooth Cinematic. The Cinematic one feels a bit too laggy for me, so I'll just do HD Freestyle. And you can change these and see what you want. You just have to make sure your crossfire is locked in 150 Hertz mode. But this is specific to the link that I am using. So I'm going to pick that. This part will differ depending on what receiver you're using. Okay, you can unplug it from Betaflight now. Okay, the last thing that you're going to need to do before you go fly is to activate and update your Kinetics Vista. So to do that, you're going to use the DJI Assistant 2 DJI FPV series. You're just going to plug in the USB-C cable into the drone. You'll see it pop up here. You'll activate it and then do all the updating and then you'll be good to go. But that's the last section. This one's already been activated because it was in another drone. Now next, you would put your propellers on, and then after that, the only thing left to do is go fly this thing. As far as the propellers, you're going to make sure you put them in the props out orientation that we had just set up in Betaflight. I'll show you what that looks like really quick. I'll just lay them out here. So these propellers here, this one's going to go in the front right, front left, rear right, and left rear. And that way these will spin outward, these will spin inward, so they'll sit just like that. I'll show you how to mount this really quick. If you look here, there's that center hub and there's the 4 holes around it. So you're going to put the prop on just like that, and then you're going to line up those holes and put the screws that came with the motors into those holes right there. So these are going to be a 1.5 millimeter driver again. I like to just get one started, kind of spin the prop, and then it's already locked in the spot. You'll put the other one in now. You don't want to go too crazy tightening these down. Really, you can just hold the motor a little bit, tighten it down a little bit, just like that. And that's going to be it. And you just repeat the process for the other 3, and then we're going to go fly this thing. If this build video helped you at all, please give it a like, it really does help. If you have any questions or want to see me build other types of drones in the future, leave it in a comment down below. Get subscribed for more build videos and flight videos and just basically everything FPV. Stay stoked and get flying.